So it's probably gone. But anyhow, I digress. What did you want to ask me?
All right. So I just have a bunch of questions here.
Yeah.
All right. So, sorry, is it
Coupe? Chicken Coupe.
Chicken Coupe, right.
Yeah.
Stuart Coupe, thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure.
It's a bit of an honour to sit down and have a chat with you. Music journalist, acclaimed author, band manager, promoter, publicist, and music label founder. In all that mix, have you ever played music in a band?
No, and you forgot radio presenter too.
Radio presenter. Yes.
No, I've never played any music in a band at all. I don't really have that sort of that thing in my makeup. I mean, for about 37 seconds in Tasmania, where I grew up, when I was about 16 or 17, one of the things I grew up was obsessed by English, Scottish, and Irish folk music, which I still love. And I bought a mandolin, and I attempted to learn to play the mandolin, and I had no aptitude for it whatsoever. So no, and that was the end of my. And I've never really craved it or anything like that. I've never been one of those people who's had a guitar and wanted to learn to play guitar, but I actually know very little about music in general. In terms of the construct of music. I've always said over the years, I don't actually listen to technique, and I'm not really interested. I'm interested in what the impact on me is, people say, oh, that's, he's a really terrible bass player, or, or that drummer's out of time, or anything like that. I've got no idea. And I'd be the same show, I've got no idea.
Yeah, right.
I'm not picking, and unless they're really out of time, or, occasionally someone will miss some notes at a show, and I go, Yeah. But for the most part, I don't think in those terms, I'm not interested in how quickly someone can move their fingers on a fretboard, unless it's incredible, like what they're doing. I saw Billy Strings the other night, 5 unbelievable musicians, and Billy Strings is just like this mind-blowing guitarist. But, I wasn't sitting there like other people nearby going, admiring his technique. I was just listening to Billy Strings make noise, sounds on a guitar that were unlike anything I'd heard in a very long time. So,
nice.
So anyhow, again, one of my typically long-winded answers to a very simple and straightforward question, Adrian. Get used to it. All right.
Okay, we'll roll on. Okay, so what was the genesis of your life in music and journalism? Was there music around the house growing up?
But Rolf Harris records, Black and White Minstrel Show, Herb Albert records, the typical records of my family weren't musical, and my mum particularly, they had the sort of the Seekers, lots of Seekers records, which was the first concert I ever saw, because they took me to see the Seekers at the Albert Hall in Launceston, and I never found out, and sadly they've both left us, as to whether they wanted me to see the Seekers or they were just being too cheap to hire a babysitter for my brother and I. But I did go and see the Seekers.
But not a bad opener.
Oh, it was great. Yeah. It was great. And then subsequently I got to know a couple of the Seekers, and it was it Keith recently emailed after my memoir came out, and I write about going to see the Seekers in it, and he read it, and he was very chuffed that my first ever concert was the Seekers. And I went to see their 50th anniversary show too, many years ago, still many years ago now. Nice. I just loved it. I listened to, Launceston had 2 radio stations, 7AX, which was comparatively radical, and 7LA, which wasn't. That was, and I listened at a crystal radio set. So I remember, you'd clip it to the phone, and I remember hearing Room to Move with Chris Winter when that was on the radio. And, radio on 70X, you'd hear, Motown records, you'd hear Jimi Hendrix, you'd hear The Who, all of that stuff was part of radio in the 60s. You know, and I remember actually I entered a competition on 70X, and you had to ring up and you had to sing a song. And I can't sing, but I managed to warble my way through a little bit of "I'm a Boy" by the Who, and I got 10 singles as my prize, some of which I still have. "Stand by Your Man" by Tammy Wynette, and "Linda Sue Dixon" by Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels, which is still, one of the greatest sort of punk rock songs of all time. So, the fact that they were even floating, something like that was even floating around a radio station in Launceston in that era. But then, no, I loved music. The first record I bought was "Friday on My Mind" by the Easy Beats after I'd saved up $1.15 doing a paper round around the local streets. And again, this is all in my memoir, Shake Some Action. But I remember taking it home and desperately, I didn't get the memo that music was meant to separate kids and their parents. I desperately wanted my parents to love "Friday on My Mind," and as I write in the book, mate, I had it on for about 30 seconds, and my father just, said, "What is this rubbish, this noise?" And I burst into tears and raced out of the family home, blah, blah, blah. And I bought records. I worked at the local squash centre because I was a really good squash player. And I used to go in with a portable record player and whatever records I'd bought, which would it be at the time, Neil Young's "Harvest," Leonard Cohen's "Songs of Love and Hate," "Every Picture Tells a Story" by Rod Stewart, "Who Live It Leads," which was the first sort of album. Well, I bought compilation albums, but the "Who Live It Leads," I think, was the first album I bought. And other things, and I kind of, there's something that's motivated me ever since. I wanted to share my passion for music with other people, so I started trying to write about that. My biggest influence was a guy called Rob Smythe, who wrote for the Nation Review. Later I read Lester Bangs and Dave Marsh and Nick Kent and all the people that you read. But Rob Smythe, Australian guy. And I used to buy Nation Review every week, simply for the half page of record reviews that Rob Smythe wrote, and I loved his aesthetic, which he wrote about anything that moved him and that was important to him. And so, because of him, I discovered the Loving Spoonful, the band, Keith Jarrett, Alan Stivell, the Dransfields, the Watersons. And the band in particular, and so once I read a Rob Smythe column, I was on a mission then to go out and get that record. And coinciding with that was also a fanatical record collector and seller who passed away 2 years ago, Stefan Markovic. And Stefan travelled around Tasmania selling. He wasn't much older than me, but he seemed a lot older at the time. And he travelled around Tasmania selling import records to people like me. And so that is why, when I tell people that I've got, the box set of the Copper Family's A Song for Every Season, which is in a phenomenally rare 4 LP box set of a family in the UK singing a song for one record for each season, on Trailer, I think it is. People go, "How did you get that in Tasmania?" I go, "Well, Stefan Markovic," and whether it was one of the Waterson records came out a while back, was reissued, Blue Puribus or whatever, and I remember interviewing someone connected with the reissue, and I said, "I'm pretty sure I had that record in Launceston," and they thought I was lying, and I said, "No, because it was only came out in limited quantities," and I go, "No, you're not going to believe this, but there's a pretty good chance that I had a copy of it." So I started writing, basically imitating Rob Smythe. I had a great teacher who came back from England and bought me the very first Bruce Springsteen record and John Cale's Paris 1919 as presents, and with him I started up a school magazine called Labyrinth, of which there was only one issue, but it was an excuse for me to write about music. So I wrote a piece about the Loving Spoonful, which was really just plagiarising Rob Smythe, but it was an attempt for me to, work out the mechanics of writing, and the best way you can write is imitation in some ways. And then I moved to Adelaide, and I became one of the co-editors of Empire Times, which is Flinders University's paper. What did we do? We put Johnny Rotten on the cover of one issue. Again, I wrote about music, started a magazine, because everyone else had a fanzine in the mid-1970s. So we did one issue of Street Fever. Then my friend Donald Robertson and I started Roadrunner magazine, which was kind of an attempt to be a, we thought, younger, hipper version of Ram, which was there were two dominant rock magazines in Australia at the time, Duke coming out of Melbourne and Ram out of Sydney. And then we used to send every issue to Anthony O'Grady with little, here we come, the young Turks, move over, old man, kind of bullshit. And Anthony was only about 2 years older than me, 3 years older. And one day and then I started freelancing for Ram, and then he rang me one day, and he said, "How would you like to come to Sydney and work for a real magazine?" Just his way of offering me a job. And so I thought about that for 37 seconds. I'd stopped uni after 2 years. I wasn't learning anything at uni that I couldn't learn at home. And so so I hopped on a plane. I moved to Sydney. He called the Angels road crew and said, "We got this guy from Adelaide. He's got a whole bunch of, basically all of my worldly possessions. Needed to get from Adelaide to Sydney." So the Angels road crew came round. They put everything in the back of the truck with the Angels gear. They were going back to Melbourne and through New South Wales, and a few weeks later they got to Sydney, and in it was all of my worldly possessions. So Ram left. Anthony O'Grady taught me how to write. Really, I mean, of all the people that, one of the things I remember was a Midnight Oil story.
We love those.
One of the first stories that Ram wrote about the Oils. And I remember I turned it in, and Anthony gave it back to me with lines all through it and notes, and he basically said, "Look, I can rewrite it for you, but you're never going to learn anything. Do it yourself. Sit here." And and I was close to tears. I stayed there till midnight or something, rewriting this long piece about Midnight Oil, and the main thing I remember about it, and Peter Garrett and I semi-joked about it for a number of years. I said the band were really great. The biggest drawback was that the singer wasn't that good, and he let me know that he'd read it. And, still can't sing, can I, Stuart? Every time I read it. How's my voice going, Stuart? Then I moved to the Sun Herald. Was their music writer for a decade. The infamous long stint at Dolly, and look at all the other things, and in 4 weeks, my 17th book comes out. I type with one finger still.
Same.
I space with the other one. Dave, when I was writing the memoir, David Dale, who got me the job at the Sun Herald, told me the story that he went to Max Such, who was the editor then, because the Sun Herald had decided that they needed to, maybe it was a good idea to not have the motoring writer do the music column.
Good move.
Yeah, and so they'd leave this guy who knew about cars to concentrate on cars, and David said he went to Max Such. He said, I got this kid, and I would have been 20. This kid would have been 24 at the time, I guess, 23, 24, and he said he can't spell. He knows nothing about grammar. No idea about punctuation. but he's really passionate about music. And he said, we could fix all the other stuff, but we should get him because of the passion about music. And, 40 years later, I still can't spell. I've still got no idea about punctuation and grammar. But I would like to think that I'm still kind of nutso about music. So it was, yeah, and I think writing something you just get better, or you hope you get better at. And I am a better writer now than I was. I'm not even in the ballpark of the people I admire. But I look back at when I was writing Shake Some Action, I had reason to look back at The Promoters, which was the first book I wrote totally by myself, from 2003, and even I could go, oh boy, all right, how do we get that sentence through? Right, oh, that's clunky, So you do. I mean, and I read a lot, and I read frequently authors who are breathtaking, and go, why am I bothering? And of course, why I'm bothering is because I'm still trying to convey my enthusiasm and love for, not just music, but other books and writing and things of that nature. So you do a lot of it. At one point, I worked out I'd had about 8 million words published, and you just write. I mean, every time I do a book, if typical book's 110,000 words. The one I've just finished, I probably wrote 300,000 for, to get it to where I and my publishers and editors were thinking like we've got some semblance of a book, which is the process I go through always a month before one comes out, going, did I just waste a couple of years, or will anyone care? But we'll find out. Yeah, we'll find out. Yeah. Right, long-winded answer to another question.
No, that's fine, mate. We love them. Any musical regrets, like a band you wished you had seen, or a venue that is long gone?
No, well, not really. I mean, look, sometimes I wish my memory was better, that I can remember more, for instance, about the Clash tour or other bits and pieces. But not, I mean, I've had an incredibly lucky life. So, regrets that my parents weren't New Yorkers, that I didn't grow up in New York. That I never saw Sam Cooke sing, or Marvin Gaye sing, or or Otis Redding sing.
They're incredible.
I've always I never saw the Grateful Dead, who are that pile of CDs that goes to there is my Grateful Dead, some of my Grateful Dead collection. I never saw Elvis, which I really did regret. I never saw Sinatra. You can go on about the people that you. I kind of don't regret, weirdly enough, seeing the Beatles. Because I mean, I guess it would have been exciting, in its own way. But I never sort of think about, I wish I'd seen the Beatles, but I kind of wish I'd seen Elvis Presley, at any stage of Presley's career. So not for venues, but I don't, I've never had an opportunity to do something that I some people would think that, how could you possibly not to have gone and seen Oasis, when you had tickets? And I was in Toronto when it was cold.
I've been in Toronto when it's cold. It is freezing.
Yeah, well, you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
I'd been down to the venue to interview them that afternoon, and it was like, it was so cold. Yeah. And I went back to the hotel, and I had dinner, and I had a nice bottle of red wine, and I had a nice view over what I could see of Toronto amidst all the snow, and I thought, no. And I didn't get Oasis. I still don't. I mean, I like them as much as I guess, I'm ever going to like them, but it wasn't. My musical tastes are much more, what I like is much more inclined towards American music, and Australian music, and I just kind of, I didn't have the Oasis bug, but when I tell people I didn't go and see Oasis, they go, how could you not go and see Oasis? I said, it was kind of easy. But no, not in a, and regretting is not something that you really have about seeing people that you just couldn't see. But I've been to, I've seen thousands of shows, done thousands of interviews, so within the realms of what was possible for me, no, there's not much to regret.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. So, favorite. You've mentioned a few concerts you've been to, but do you have a favorite concert memory?
Not really. That would change. No, that would just change constantly. I mean, and sometimes it's the thing you've most recently seen, and Billy Strings just blew my mind. I knew he'd be kind of good, but I was unprepared for this artist who's ostensibly known for being a bluegrass country guy to also just put on a live show which had elements of the Grateful Dead, prog rock, improvisation. It was just like mesmerizing. The last time Patti Smith was here, I saw every show I could. In Sydney, I went to every show. That was incredible. Springsteen says even that Springsteen is the to my mind probably the greatest live performer that I think pretty much anyone will ever see.
He's in my top 5 for sure.
So no, I'll walk out of shows just going, whoa, there were the last 45 minutes of Neil Young's Green Day tour. Green Day was kind of like his Rock of Stedford and was pretty forgettable, but then he came back out with Crazy Horse and played for about 45 minutes, which was like unbelievable. But then you go back to the first couple of times Tom Waits played in Australia. Was it 80 or 81? I mean, there's so no, I don't have any. I don't have any particular shows, and so and sometimes it's this. It's not always big bands that give you. That's the most incredible thing I've ever seen. It can be just Australian bands at any sort of level, and it can be at the time watching the Hoodoo Gurus playing at the Strawberry Hills Hotel, that was as good as rock and roll got. Watching Paul Kelly at 3 a.m. in the morning at the Mansell Room with Brett Whiteley, watching, and how good was Paul when he was on in that era.
Full band mode for Paul then?
That was the Dots full band mode, before I became his manager. So I used to go and see him all the time, and this particular night, it was actually about 1:30, I think, and so that means I would have been doing maybe their second set at the Mansell, and Brett Whiteley walked in, and Paul saw him. And I remember he hopped off the stage, walked over to Brett Whiteley, dragging a guitar, a chord, and he got on his knees and looked up at Whiteley and saying, I'm alive and well, and just looking at Brett Whiteley, and then he just got up and turned around and walked back to the stage. That was pretty incredible, and So it's just, was it Lenny Kay or someone, whoever talked about the remains, or was it John Landau, one of them, saying, at any given point in any given city, the band that you've just seen could be the greatest band that you will ever see in your entire life. And that makes absolutely perfect sense to me, that you can just stumble into some bar or place and you go, oh, whoa, like some years ago, my partner and I were in New York, and, we saw Springsteen on Broadway. We went and saw ELO, that we both loved. We saw the Sun Ra Orchestra. We saw, we were just there at a really, really good time. What do we both still talk about? Walking into a bar and seeing the Blasters, Phil Alvin's band, and both just going, so it's not always you tend to remember the bigger names more, but for me, was it seeing the Laughing Clowns? Was it seeing, all of the bands that used to play at the Trade Union Club,
the Journal,
and and it was like, you look back at those 80s things, and you just go, God, did we see, look at that lineup, look at that. Or was it Los Lobos at Salinas, or, Roger Grierson and I, we put the Gun Club on at the Strawberry Hills Hotel on a Monday night. We put the Trogs on, at the Strawberry Hills Hotel. Just because we kind of could. And so, it's a, I mean, I was just writing about it recently, and I just sort of looked at a book that prompted me. Was it like seeing Lou Reed, on his first tour of Australia in Adelaide in 1974, where he was supported by, this bunch dressed in pink flares, with this, this guy dressed in a schoolboy's uniform, and it was a month before Bond joined AC/DC. So it was Dave Evans as the lead singer. They were supporting Lou Reed in Adelaide in 74. So, and Lou was unbelievable. So there's millions of them.
Right.
But not one that sticks in my head going, that was the greatest thing. And I'm not even sure it was the first time I saw Springsteen. It was incredible. But have I enjoyed shows? I've seen him 50 or 60 times. Have I enjoyed other shows more? Probably. That was, those 2 nights in Paris were the first ones. But then, a couple of years, maybe mid-80s, I saw him in New Jersey, and I thought, wow, this is like what it'd be like, if the Pope was playing rock and roll at the Vatican. It was that incredible. But, and I just mentioned ELO at Madison Square Garden, which was kind of like, I never thought I'd see ELO, and they were mind-blowing, Right, yep.
So, right, to the gist of why we're here today. Rock T-shirts. So you mentioned you have about 1,500.
I guess I've never counted.
Somewhere there, somewhere around that number. Do you remember your first ever rock T-shirt?
No, I've got no idea.
No.
I can't even remember when rock and roll T-shirts became a thing. I can remember wearing an It's Time T-shirt around in Launceston, before the in the Whitlam era. But when I started buying rock T-shirts, I know when I was managing the Hoodoo Gurus in the early 80s, we did shirts. Paul Kelly, we did shirts. That was probably, I managed X for a period, the Australian X, we did T-shirts. But I can't, I can't remember, for instance, when I worked on the Clash's tour of Australia, was there a Clash T-shirt? And I suspect not, because merch, as we now refer to T-shirts and anything else, just wasn't it wasn't a big deal in those days. You know, like it wasn't a key component of your income because everyone was making a lot of money from record sales and from live shows. Now, someone who knows history will be able to correct me on this, but I just don't recall pre-mid 80s, early 80s, I should say, I don't recall wearing rock band shirts. So I'm sure there is a history of merch and a history of t-shirts which tell us when they started.
I remember getting an email from Rob Hurst.
Yeah.
And I was sort of asking him about his favourite rock t-shirt, and it was one that he said had long gone. He'd worn it to death, and it was a Clash t-shirt that he got in London in 1982.
Right, so they were doing merch then. Okay, so whether they did it in Australia or whether they bought t-shirts or manufactured, they may well have done, and I may well have owned one, but I don't recall. So I mean, the first, I mean, you know, and Paul Warstead used to do shirts. Who did, you know, the poster artist that did a lot of work for Stephen Cummings and Mental as Anything and things like that. You know, were the Mentals early adopters of t-shirts? I mean, I'm now the publicist for Dog Trumpet, so I should ask Reg and Pete whether they did early shirts. But I guess my earliest memories are, you know, Hoodoo Guru shirts. Yeah. You know, we did them for Leilani and we did them for Stone Age Romeos, and
nice.
And they were screen printed. You know, they weren't mass done. You know, like in hundreds and things like that. I don't remember. So no, the first one I remember is possibly, you know, Hoodoo Guru's one for Leilani or My Girl or something like that. You know, but whilst I have a really good memory, it doesn't mean that it's infallible, you know.
Yeah. I remember hearing on the radio they did a segment on rock t-shirts, and the host was asking for people to ring up with who they think, or do they have one of the earliest rock t-shirts.
Yeah.
One guy rang up with an Easy Beats t-shirt, like I think it was around 64, 65, something like that, I think.
I find that really hard to believe.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, in case you're watching Mr. Easy Beats t-shirt, I find that really hard to imagine that any Australian band in that era was doing t-shirts.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they weren't.
No.
But that's a real stretch for me.
Yeah.
That there were band t-shirts around in the 60s.
Yeah, I could be wrong with the date, but
yeah,
you know.
I mean, look, it feels to me like that they probably started to appear, you know. I mean, I guess, you know, but even the punk rock shirts you saw in the 70s tended to be handmade ones. You know, people would make their own shirts. And, you know, and I don't remember at the time, you know, like if there was a Sex Pistols t-shirt, I would have bought one, you know, in 77 or something. You know,
I bought one in 86.
Yeah. I mean, that all of that makes perfect sense. That 80s period, but in the 70s, I mean, you know, did the Ramones, all of those people that you would think would lend themselves to shirts. You know, I don't remember seeing a Ramones t-shirt at the time, you know, and again, I saw them the first time they came to Australia, and
was that 1980?
Yeah, they played at the
Capitol.
They played a show at Checkers too.
And Checkers, yes.
And again, I think I would have bought a Ramones shirt if they were there. You know, I just the whole notion of a merch setup being at shows. I don't remember that happening.
Yeah.
You know, until a little bit later.
Yeah.
But as I said, that's only my recollection.
Sure.
So yeah. So look, and then, again, it seems to me that it was a lot longer before. I remember the shirts I got for Springsteen in '81. That was like a big deal. But in terms of my own, buying of shirts, it seemed to be that I probably started. They seem to be about mid '80s is when I remember them being a bit of a fixture, and you would start to get T-shirts by particular bands. Do I still have any of them? No. It seems to me that the golden era of the T-shirt and the merch was '90s onwards is my feeling. But I guess. When did Rob Hurst say when Midnight Oil started doing shirts?
I haven't put that question to him,
No.
I still have my very first rock T-shirt, which was I saw the Oils at the Sydney Entertainment Centre on the 22nd of December '85.
Yeah, and there was a shirt.
I got the shirt, and
what was on it? Was it the hand, or was it?
No, it was that kind of sort of abstract 80s sort of. There were like little glitches all over the front of the shirt. It's a white shirt with the tour dates in the back, steel base slide all over it. Yeah, just very 80s looking T-shirt.
And so they would have had a merch selling it.
Yeah, they were definitely selling merch.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, well, I guess well, we've got someone who reckons it all started with the Easy Beats in '64, but that period when I was like, I was managing Paul Kelly, then after finishing up with the Hoodoo Gurus, we certainly were very conscious of having T-shirts in that mid '80s period. But when I first, look, I didn't, I lived outside of Sydney from 1990 to 1997. So, and I didn't see an enormous amount of live music during that period. My T-shirt buying, it's still, from late '90s onwards,
Yeah, probably about the same for me, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, it became a habit you just got into. You'd go to a show and you'd buy a shirt.
Yeah.
For whatever, and I remember there was, that period when there was always, you first started seeing the bootleg shirts outside shows. You'd walk up the road and there'd be, a pretty close to version of what was sold inside for $12 instead of 30.
And some of them are worth money now, yeah.
Yeah, well, I bet. Yeah. And I've certainly noticed, I'm trying to think what a shirt was worth when I first started buying them. Why do I think it was like $20 or something? Does that ring?
Yeah, it rings a bell. About $15-$20.
Yeah, and now we're in the 60, 65,
$50 to $60, yeah.
Yeah, which is an incredible profit margin.
Oh yeah.
Given that the shirt is a couple of bucks, if that, if that, and then they got to be printed. Okay, you got to pay sellers, you got to pay blah blah blah, but still the profit margin on a $60 T-shirt is astronomically, But do you begrudge it? Quite often, I would buy a shirt just by way of going, okay, they're not making very much money these days. And particularly for younger bands, it's a way of showing support.
Sure, yeah.
I say to people that I work with, as a publicist, I go, do vinyl, because people will buy it at $50 at a show. Half of them won't actually have a turntable. It'll never get played, but they will buy it as a show of support, and a way to give you money.
Yeah, well, I remember, like, I was living in Glebe at the time. The mid to late 80s, and I would go and see bands like at the Sydney Cove Tavern. I'd see the Angels, I'd see the Selbert Rifles at the Lansdowne Hotel, I'd see the Trilobites at the Hopetown Hotel, travel all over Sydney seeing gigs, and as I don't remember seeing a lot of
I don't either
merch on sale.
I honestly, I'm like you. because the chances are, if it did exist, somewhere downstairs, I think I have some of those early Hoodoo Guru shirts, right?
Mm.
So I think if they existed, I probably, like you, would have bought them.
Yeah.
I mean, I know. Possibly, I was thinking about it before. We met up. One of the most, I don't know whether it's valuable, but collectible shirts I actually bought in Nashville when I was traveling around with Paul Kelly in about 1986 or 87, and I have a blue George Jones T-shirt. And its thing is No Show Jones, which he was notorious for not turning up for gigs. And so right down the back, it's got dates and it's got red lines through all the gigs. And they'd actually been printed like that, as a badge of honour. No Show Jones shirt. So, and I still have that from the 80s. So it would make sense that if, Australian bands were doing shirts, that I would still have some of them, I guess, or have a better memory of them, than I do, but I don't. So I can't tell you beyond my first conscious memory of having a shirt would have been the Hoodoo Gurus, because I was involved with them and would have been my partner at the time, did the designs for them,
Right.
and may well have screen printed them. So we certainly had shirts. So that's my most educated answer to that question.
Did you have any involvement in that? It was maybe 5-6 years ago now. The Hoodoo Gurus did a like a sort of expo where they played live at the Powerhouse Museum.
Yeah, I didn't have anything to do with that. No.
Okay.
No, I still, we're still friends. But no, I didn't have anything. I just.
I remember seeing some early posters and T-shirts and stuff there.
Yeah. I mean, from the that stuff. I mean, they prided themselves on doing great artwork. And my then partner, designed the cover for Stone Age Romeos and all of those early singles, and so forth. So we did incredible, screen printed, big, huge, big posters and all of that sort of stuff, which are worth a fortune. These days, I think I have did have, because we toured, the Gurus and I toured, we toured with Lou Reed on the New Sensations tour in '85. Why do I think that I have I have a tour T-shirt from there, and but I don't. Like I worked on the Dead Kennedys tour of Australia. I don't recall us having Dead Kennedys shirts. And again, Jello was the sort of person that if there was a buck to be made with T-shirts, Jello would have had T-shirts. So I get the feeling that like the mid '80s became the real serious, the beginnings of serious merchandise. But someone like Brian Taranto, who runs Love Police, is a friend of mine. He would know.
For sure, yeah.
So, and you should
have a few of his in my cupboard, yeah.
If you want, I can organise an intro to him. You should definitely have him on your, Yeah.
That'd be awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, what else can I tell you?
Well, most of it we've already sort of covered. Maybe the last one, going back through your memory again, do you have a favourite T-shirt in your collection?
No. No. I mean, I like most of them for different reasons. There are certain ones that I like, and don't ask me to find them because nothing's in any order. But I have a Steely Dan shirt, which is a takeoff of the Sonic Youth record cover.
Nice.
Which I love. Pip Proud, the eccentric psychedelic Australian guy, I have a Pip Proud shirt which I really like wearing. I have some Grateful Dead shirts that I like wearing, including one of those ones with the names of the 5 members of the Dead members down the side. I like wearing that. What else do I get excited about when I find it in the cupboard? I literally will just reach in and go, what was I wearing the other day? I was wearing a yellow Paul McCartney shirt from the last tour here, which I bought. The moment we finished talking, Adrian, I'm going to go, I should have told him about this shirt, or I should have told him about that shirt. But no, I don't really really have. And sometimes when I go to see shows and they have terrible merch, I get really disappointed. And I go, oh God, I just can't find anything here that I would actually wear. So I guess I've cut back a little more, and particularly now, if I go to a show, because I'm such a nerdy record collector, now the T-shirt has competition, and you're kind of going, okie dokie, what am I going to get? I already have too many shirts. I already have too many records. Which one am I going to have extra too many of at the end of the show? So you kind of, sometimes there was a period when it seemed like it was only T-shirts. And one of the things that I wear most, which is not a T-shirt, but is a hoodie, is I bought a Warren Ellis. I'm a huge Dirty Three fan. But I don't think I own a Dirty Three T-shirt, but I own a Warren Ellis hoodie. Nice. With a design on the front and a design on the back, which I wear all the time. But then, then again, I remember buying a Patti Smith hoodie at her last show, and I've never worn it because it seems really good when you look at it. And then it seems really ostentatious to be walking around with this really elaborate, so I don't.
Get out of the cupboard, mate. Give it a run.
Look, it's there, but I wear of hoodies, which again, as I've got older, I wear more than I ever thought I would. I've got a Los Ragas one, Australian band that I love. I wear that quite a bit. I felt completely cheated by buying a Wilco wind shooter because it's just like it's so thin. Hoodie, I want them to be warm. That's why you buy them. Yes. And the Wilco one, and I love Wilco, and they're one of the greatest. In fact, one of the greatest shows I've ever seen was. The greatest shows in recent years are probably Wilco at the Opera House, the Dirty Three Anywhere. I think I saw 4 shows on the last tour. I went to Melbourne to see a couple, and then before that at the State Theatre. But Wilco at the Opera House on the last tour were just unbelievable. But then, so was MJ Lenderman, at the Opera House only a couple of months ago. That show was like next level, like, whoa. And I'm forgetting a million things that we've been to recently. Because they do tend to blur into this. I kind of think who'd I go. It wasn't one of the greatest shows ever, but it was pretty great. Seeing Beth Gibbons at the recent Vivid, and Marlon Williams' show was pretty incredible. The Maori language show. Stuff like that. There's always, like we go out a lot, not as much as some people, but, we go and see, we don't, David Byrne's show on the last time he was here at my least favourite venue in the world, well, not quite. The ICC.
Oh, well, say no more.
Yeah, I know. But I ran into a friend of mine the other night, and I was carrying on about, how much it makes me miss the entertainment centre, which is words I never thought would come out of my own mouth. And he's involved with the ICC, so but I'm getting to like it more. But you know, it's an awful, you know, it's a cold, soulless room. But David Byrne made it work.
Yeah.
You know, and it was one of the few.
He'd make any room work. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's, you know, and you know, look, Billy Strings made it feel like a warm space the other night too. I thought, you know, which again, to my surprise, you know, I almost didn't go because, much as I love Billy Strings, I almost didn't go because it was at the ICC. You know, but I'm glad I did. So, but yeah, so, but I'll continue. No, I like, you know. T-shirts, yeah. I mean, as I said, if you want them, I'll just go and put my hand in randomly and grab a couple and bring them down. But you know, it's you know, I don't keep the moments like the rest of my life. I don't keep them in any order. You know, there are people who can go, all right, I feel like wearing my David Rawlings and Gillian Welsh shirt today, and they, you know, they have them filed. Like they have their records and their CDs and every other aspect of their life, and literally what's not downstairs, which is about, you know, those plastic containers.
Oh yeah,
is
the
about
storage containers.
Yeah, is about 5 or 6 of those, and then a clothes rack, and then in the bedroom, they were really neat when we sorted through them, but they're no longer neat. You know, there's probably 200 or 300 there that, you know, are kind of just on rotation. Oh, one of my other favourites is because I'm a big Charles Schulz, Peanuts, Snoopy fan, and one is a Devo. It's a version of that, you know, and when, you know,
I recently saw them.
Yeah, I didn't go. I was never a big enough Devo fan to want to go, but then I know people who went and said it was incredible. You know,
they were playing the Good Things Festival. I got to see them.
Oh, you had them at the festival, right? Because they did an ICC, didn't they? They did. Yeah.
But like me, you know, growing up as a kid, like watching them on telly, like getting the chance to see them, just awesome.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, and that's part of that that thing of, you know, well, we didn't have the chance to see them in their heyday, and you know, and look, some of them, when you see them, you know, now they're still really great.
For sure, yeah.
You know, I'm going to see 10cc next Friday, and I've never seen 10cc, but everyone who goes to see them, because it's all bar one original member, tells me that 10cc are unbelievable, you know. So you know, I picked up some super cheap tickets, so I'm just going to go, okay, you know, I'll wander down and see what they're like. I mean, they're all about 180. In fact, they're probably only a few years older than I am, you know, which is the scary thing about this process, that you know, you think these people are so much older than you, and then you find out that they're only, or in some cases, when you get to my age, you find out that they're younger than you are. And you go, how did that happen?
How did that happen?
Yeah, you're not meant to be younger than me. You know? So, but does that help? Does that give
helps,
you?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, hang on. Stuart, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much,
Adrian.
It's been awesome. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Very good.
Do you want me to go and find a